Okay. Thank you, Jade. Okay, so we are presenting Advocating for Libraries. Just a disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation represent the views of the speakers and not necessarily those of their employers. My name is Tai Arakawa. I'm the circulation supervisor at Sullivan Family Library at Chaminade University. We also have Meera Garud, an instructor at the Library and Information Science program at UH Manoa, and Pam Lough,
Lough.
Lough, sorry,
Lough.
ontologist with the CDC Foundation and the California Department of Public Health. And below is our advocacy email. Um, you, if you're interested after this presentation and joining, or you have any questions, you can email us there. Okay, so our agenda. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 Ps of advocacy, and then we'll segue into how to identify your local legislators, how to visit the Capitol, drafting an email or phone script template based on or around the pertinent issue, following up on your email or phone call, and how to invite legislators into your space. And then we'll follow that up with a Q&A session. Okay, so the 5 Ps of advocacy are being prepared, being persistent, being patient, being positive, and being polite. So with that in mind, first, you need to know how to identify your local legislators. So in Hawaii, you would just go to capitol.hawaii.gov, and as you can see in the photo, the left-hand drop-down menu, go to that, and you can find your legislator. And you will type your address into the search box, and like a default map, which is interactive, will show up. Your Senate district will be in blue, and your district will be outlined in red. And you will have your legislator's profile along with their contact information and their district numbers included. So this is a screenshot. Since I work in Kaimuki, I just used the 96816 zip code as an example. And here you can see the districts outlined in red and blue. And if you can see here on your right, if you click on these arrows, you will see who our Senate and House legislators are for this district. Oh, and the map is also interactive. For further information about your legislators, you can go back to the website and look up their page. You'll see the committees, the bills they're on, the bills they've introduced, any news or links about them. So again, you go back to that same drop-down menu, and here you can find your legislator. I'm using as an example the 2023 representatives, and I'm looking for the Kaimuki area representative. And this is Bertrand Kobayashi, and I just took a screenshot of his page. You can see the areas he covers, what district he is, his contact information, all the measures that were introduced in 2023, which committees he was in. There's a little profile about him, experience, and news and links. Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Pam.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about how to visit the Capitol, which is located at 415 South Beretania Street in Honolulu. There's a paid parking garage below the reflecting pool, and it's open Monday through Friday from 7:45 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. There's a website where you can learn about taking a tour of the state capitol, and then there's a link below that where you can take a virtual tour of the state capitol as well. Let's see. And then I'll also talk about how to draft an email or phone script. This is actually based on a sample letter to elected officials from the American Association of School Librarians. And of course, if you're going to do this as an email or phone script, then you wouldn't be quite as formal. You wouldn't put like your name, address, et cetera, up at the top. And so you can, I'm not going to read that whole thing to you, but that's just like a template for what you might want to include if you're going to do an email or create a phone script. So next slide. And then I'll talk about how to follow up after the email or phone call. And you should allow at least 2 weeks for your email to be read if you've sent an email rather than made a phone call. And then remember that these people are very busy, so don't be offended if they don't respond quickly. And if you do expect a response to your email, you can follow up with a phone call. And when you phone, be prepared to speak with someone other than the person you've written to. Once again, they might be busy, they might not have receptionists, et cetera. And be prepared to leave a message. Know what you're going to want to say. If you do need to leave a message, know what you're going to want to say. If you don't leave a message and actually get to speak to someone. So if you reach your intended party, check whether they've had a chance to read your email or to think about your previous phone request. Next slide. And so here's a bit of information again from the school library resources from the American Library Association about how to craft a speech or pitch. What do you need your audience to know? Think about the message, come up with a story and key data so you can connect the message specifically to your work with quick facts or data in a story. And then what are you asking? Consider who you're talking to and what they care about and what it is within their power to impact. So be specific. And then they just kind of refer to this as the whole thing as the elevator speech, which packages it all in a way that's short, personal, and memorable. Next slide. And here's another resource from the ALA with some possible talking points and tools. You probably already have a rough idea what you're going to want to talk about if you're planning to make contact. If you don't, for some reason, here's some ideas, or even if you do, maybe the points you want to make or the questions you want to ask are covered in some of these templates and examples. So it's certainly worth taking a peek at these if you're planning to either write an email, a letter, or make a phone call, just to see what other kinds of examples you can look at. And I think that is next slide. That might not be me anymore. Yeah, there's.
Thanks, Pam.
So this
Yeah, I'll
goes
take
on to
over
Meera.
from you.
Thanks.
Great. So this last part that we wanted to share how to invite invite your legislators and in general elected officials into your library space. I think this takes the different pieces that Ty and Pam just shared and puts it into one specific thing that you might be able to do with all of that information. It is definitely shooting for the stars, I feel like, to invite a big person over into your space, but I think approaching it with this idea of building a relationship is really important so that they understand when they get to know you, they understand more about what you're working with and they can see where you serve your patrons and your library community. So this first slide that I'm sharing just outlines the whole process overall. So I got a lot of this advice from a resource that ALA provides. And if you scan that QR code, it takes you to that checklist. But there are other tips that I picked up from individuals and other articles as well. But essentially, you want to be able to select a specific person and know what you're inviting them to and for. What's the purpose of it? Definitely want to make any written invitation very clear, but also convincing so that you're likely to get that busy person interested in coming to your event. Then, of course, following up and then preparing all the logistics. So this is something you really want to think about and plan ahead of time. And then, of course, on that day when they're visiting, you just want to keep in mind to be patient, polite, and positive because things might not go as planned, even with all your great preparation. And then this last part I think is super important is continuing the conversation by following up after the visit. So in the next couple slides, Ty, if you can advance it, I'm going to dig a little bit more into those different steps. So thinking about a purpose and who you might be inviting, you want to think about what type of library you're in, what are your unique strengths, challenges, and contributions that you have that you really want to highlight for somebody who might not know what libraries do. So for the case of a school library, you might be showing the impact that you have on student learning by inviting somebody to attend a performance or some sort of showcase of what the students have done in the library space. You might be highlighting the role of teacher collaboration and how you support teachers. And you might also want to highlight how you impact families and how you work with families that have their kids attending your school. So I'm not going to read all of these other ones, just have these up here as suggestions depending on the type of library you're in. And then when you're thinking about the kind of event you might be inviting an official to, this could be something that is really specific to that official. So if you know of an official that's interested in something particular that you have to offer, you might want to consider inviting them. But let's say it's a new legislator, somebody newly elected. You might just be inviting them to tour your space and getting to know them. So it doesn't have to be a big production. It could just be just kind of getting to know newly elected officials as well. I've seen some officials at anniversaries and kickoff events. Those are always really nice celebratory spaces to invite officials to. So, those often have media coverage, which can be a compelling reason for an official to want to take their time to join. And then don't forget that sometimes your school principal or your college administrator might be inviting a legislator to visit the campus that day or a certain day. So try to find out about that and make sure that person has a stop scheduled in the library. So there's different ways you might have officials visit. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so then when it comes to actually doing the invitation and following up with them, so being very clear in the invitation, providing clear statements about the purpose and the benefits that they would get out of the visit. So thinking about what role they would have at the event. Are they going to be expected to make a couple remarks for a couple of minutes, or are they participating? Are they introducing an award winner? So really emphasizing what you're hoping that they will do and what they would get out of it. Obviously, time, date, location, and your contact information. You would want to let them know ahead of time if you already have media planned. If that's something that you're not sure about, you might wait on that and see if they're okay with having media there. Then as far as so those are more of the technical pieces, what to include, but you also want to establish a tone that is focused on relationships and gratitude. So relationships like, as always, our library does this thing, or to follow up on a question that you had, or to, I've seen that you're interested in this issue, and then our library, kind of connecting it to something that they're interested in. And if you already have a relationship going on, making sure to refer to that. So it's building on something that you've already established. And then it can't hurt to include a few words of gratitude, such as mahalo for your interest in education or in libraries. We know you're a supporter of libraries. Please attend this thing. Something like that can make your invitation stand out. Okay, so I think Pam touched on this a bit, but being persistent yet patient at the same time. So that can be a challenge for balancing. So really, I think I forgot to say this, but early on, invite the official. That way you have time to follow up and give them that couple of weeks to figure things out before you pick up the phone and call. So as early as possible, send that invitation. And then 2 weeks later, if you don't hear, then you might call them, or you might ask somebody else that has a strong relationship with that person to just make sure that they got the invitation. That's really what that call is about, making sure they got the invitation, answering any questions that might be on their mind. And ideally, if you have a lot of time that you've scheduled into your process, if they are unable to attend, you might consider inviting another official instead. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so for preparing and implementing and actually continuing the relationship after, this is where a lot of the work is going to come in ahead of the day of the event. So making sure that you have parking arranged for them. If it's going to be a really big event in general, you might consider traffic management of some sort. So just thinking about the logistics and making sure they're not going to be late because they couldn't find a parking space or something like that. Also check in with your own administration about any policies or things that you'll need to follow that day. Making sure that they have some water. You would want to provide them with a lei as cultural protocol. And depending on your institution, that lei should be reimbursable because it is part of a cultural protocol. It's not just because you felt like it. It's really important to establish that connection. And then keep in mind, so I'm mentioning lei, but often elected officials can't accept any gift of any kind. So, if they can't sit down for a meal because that counts as a gift, or, definitely nothing expensive. But I know that a lei would be fine. All right, and then some more behind the scenes things that you might be doing. So getting to know their names and their faces, because if you don't know that, you might not realize that you're actually talking to the official once they walk in the room, right? So you want to be able to recognize them and know how to pronounce their name. Okay, so you also want to prepare some talking points ahead of time, and these should really emphasize the library's strengths, anything that you need in particular, anything you might be asking for from that official. Also talking about any impacts that the library has had on the community. And in this case, you might also want to check in again with your administration, because I know that with a public library branches should be aligning their talking points with the Office of the State Librarian's priorities as a way to just kind of be on that same page. And that's something I heard from a public librarian. So I just wanted to mention that because I had not realized that before before doing some research for this talk. And then, of course, if you're in a school library, I think it's important to have a close relationship with your administrator so that you know what you're trying to get out of this visit from the official. All right, and then the last thing I have for being prepared is a detailed plan. So something that has times where things are supposed to happen, what resources need to be there, who is involved. And so making sure you identify friendly and reliable people who will be at that parking spot, ready to escort the person or ready to handle any issues that come up. Somebody that's kind of that balance between flexible but prepared at the same time. And then this is kind of going back to the fact that officials have a lot on their plate and often pulled in different directions. Be prepared to accept a no-show and handle that with grace. Sometimes they might send a staff member in place of themselves if something comes up last minute. So just accept that, roll with it, and move forward. Even if you are hurt personally, don't take it personally. It's not about you. It is about their schedule. Okay, and then persistence. So I think this is so important to follow up after and continue that relationship. You might send them pictures of the event, any comments that you had heard from different people attending the event. And of course, if you had a conversation where you were asking for something or they were asking for information, you would want to provide that in this follow-up message. Okay, I think that is everything that we had. Just circling back to the 5 Ps of advocacy, hopefully you feel prepared to identify your legislators, especially the ones in your library area, and you feel prepared to contact them with a tone that will be effective, and then following up as well. So I've seen some comments in the chat. I'm not sure what they were. I think they were general comments, but we do have an activity as well if we have to, we definitely have time for that. So, but maybe we should start with questions from the group. Let's see. Okay, yeah, contingency plan, definitely. Oh, thanks, Sunny, for sharing that about public meeting spaces. So yeah, it's kind of establishing the fact that the library is a space for them and can be a benefit for their work as well as the community, and kind of showcasing how nice that is. So great. Does anybody have questions for what we shared?
This was a great format and presentation to Meera and group Ty. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So a
Meera, if you
question about identifying that you are a state employee. Oh, Ty or Pam, do you want to address that?
well, I did have a question, but it was really when I participated in the Love My Library Day, it was I was running some of the kids' activities, and it was actually a family that came up to me and started asking me questions. So I had to like um, preface it with a, by the way, I'm actually an academic librarian. I'm not a public librarian. So because they were asking me about resources at the public library. So I told them, I know they have these things, but um, you would probably want to get in contact with your local library and librarians because they would have a better idea of their own collections and what um, the library system as a whole has in terms of like databases and foreign languages and um, options and whatnot. So
Yeah, I agree with you. And if you're contacting them on behalf of an organization, then you would definitely want to tell them a bit about the organization. And even if you're not working for a state library or a state or public organization, even if you're working for a private one, if you're contacting them about that, then definitely tell them a bit about it. Yeah.
Thanks for these questions. It's making me think too that there is a dual role of advocacy. One is you as an individual in the community advocating for what you think the community needs. And of course, that's going to be influenced by the fact that you're a librarian and you have insight on how the community needs access to different resources. So that's you as a private individual. And then there's also making sure that the officials in your community, whether they're elected or even important community leaders, that you establish a relationship with them. And I think that is part of your job as a public institution, is to make sure that you're informing them, right? You're not pressuring them to do something like legislation necessarily, but you're sharing with them, hey, this is the impact that we have on the community, and we'd love to do more. We would do more if we had X, Y, or Z. So I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. So I think just treating it as a conversation between a state institution and then an elected official. I think you have to have a conversation and relationships for things to function. But yeah, I can see how that would feel uncomfortable or tricky. And so maybe like ahead of time, making a list for yourself of what things you think are really important to address as an official versus things that might be on your mind, but you might want to keep aside for a different conversation where you're just talking to your legislators as a person.
Oh, so for the Kahuku Library, do you recommend sending an update on the event if the legislator didn't show? Not to guilt them, but to inform them and keep us on their radar. Actually, that's what we did with the Love My Library event. We sent out, we targeted specific committees that had sort of influence over funding and libraries. And we sent them information or invitations to our Love My Library event. And I think only one showed up, but we did get responses like thank you. We did have one who, a representative from Big Island, I think, who wanted to know if it was going to be on all islands. And we had to explain, no, this is our first time, this we just kind of like set it up for a couple hours and in Ala Moana. Um, it was something to keep in mind because she did show interest, so that was all really good. Um, and and afterward, I think we sent thank you letters too. So just keep keep us on their radar.
See a question from Gwen.
Hi, I just wanted to share a little story as a cautionary tale. Stuart Chun and I went to visit Neil Abercrombie in his office in when he was in Congress, and we were trying to talk to him about the Federal Depository Library Program. But all Neil Abercrombie wanted to talk about was Makiki Library. And so you have, it pays to be aware of what the individual legislators' personal interests are, so that you're not taken unawares when they start going off on a tangent that you didn't really want to go off on. So forewarned is forearmed. Thanks.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That makes yeah, like Sunny said, it makes sense. It kind of reminds me of doing the preliminary research on the legislator. If you don't already have a relationship with them and you don't know what kind of things they might be interested in, that would be divergent. Just reading about them. Somebody mentioned Ballotpedia, and I know different newspapers as well, like Civil Beat, will sometimes post interviews, so you can kind of get a sense of what your legislators are interested in.
We had a couple of questions about advocating as employees versus advocating as private citizens. I think there might have been two similar questions on that. And I'll jump in and then see if anybody else wants to add to it. I would say it kind of depends on why you're contacting them. You know, you could be contacting them as a private citizen, as say a parent of a child and you want your kid to have a good school library with a qualified librarian. So that's an example of when it is appropriate. And I don't know if it's ever not appropriate to advocate as a private citizen. And then as employees, you know, if you're wanting to make sure that funding comes to your library, or that your library stays open or expands hours, or, you know, it's kind of a broader purpose than just plain old wanting to have one. But I think you could go either way. It really depends on why you're advocating. So,
I think it also depends on what your employer's policies are too. Yeah. I know I think for the advocacy group, when we write in as individuals, we use our personal emails to do that. But, you know, private citizen.
You know, riffing on the private citizen aspect, there are always times when legislators are trying to reach out to voters. I mean, if they knock on your door to talk with you or get to meet you, or if you attend a reception that they're sponsoring, those are always good opportunities to just go up and introduce yourself as a private citizen, but also say, and by the way, I'm also a librarian, and, you know, I have this kind of knowledge about the community, and these are my observations, and I would like to, you know, recommend or suggest that you think about these things. So you're kind of blending a little bit, but the initial contact is as a private citizen. And they're listening to you because, especially if they're running for election, they're trying to find out what their community wants and needs.
Yeah, I'm seeing more in the chat about this conversation, and I agree. I think more reminders and trainings on how to navigate that dual role would be really helpful, because it's one of those things that most of us don't enter the library profession because we want to be lobbying the legislator, or, you know, yeah, well, most of it. I'm speaking for myself. That's not why I became interested in this, but knowing what the rules are, so that there's two different sides. So it doesn't keep you from doing what's appropriate and what's necessary for your job, but also so you don't find yourself in trouble as well. And so I think people can feel afraid of it because they don't know what the rules are. And unfortunately, I think sometimes the rules depend on what the situation is. So yeah, more training and practice navigating that is useful. Regarding the policies about using state resources and time, I think that goes back to, you know, if it's something you're doing on a individual basis, like lobbying for, or you want some specific bill to pass, I would definitely use your personal contact information and not be doing that on the job. But if it's something where the library needs resources and that's what the ask is about, I think it's appropriate to do that on your time, because it's, you know, your job is to make the library open and have resources. So
yeah, this is a really interesting discussion, because I agree with checking about your employer's policies, but then it's not so black and white, because as Meera is saying, if part of your job is to get funding for your library, for example, then presumably your employer would support that. I suppose if in doubt, then check, check. Is it, are you okay with my doing this? Then they'd probably say yes if it means that more funding is going to come the way, is my guess, but you never know.
I think in the case of the University of Hawaii, I mean, I worked for the College of Engineering, and the principal investigator had developed several relationships with House representatives and also senators. This was a while ago. This was like right after 1990. And not a few years after this, UH basically set out a policy saying that individual faculty should not be approaching representatives and senators for funding purposes, mainly because it created a difficult situation where they're allocating one budget to the University of Hawaii system, which is responsible for making resource decisions. But then you get all these other people who are going in the side door asking for special projects. And then, of course, when our state legislature would ask UH system administrators, well, what about this special project? Then they wouldn't know anything about it. So there was a real big communication problem there. So I can kind of understand that. So I think, so I'm speaking in terms of what I saw as a transition in policy at the University of Hawaii. I would caution people to take too large a precautionary stance. I know that, I mean, the legislators that I have met, they're very interested in what's happening in their communities and how they can help, and they'll figure out a way of resourcing the entire public library system, and your particular community may benefit. But again, yes, check with your supervisors and your administration.
Yeah, I appreciate that addition and personal example that you noticed at the university when you were there. It made me think of the difference between having like a state level or system level official ask that, it's done by people that know legislation, know what they're doing. And I think it's important to not like come and ask for something too specific that's going to be different from that larger ask. But I think what you're doing when you're inviting officials or forging relationships is you're providing the local examples, because that's what they are interested in knowing about, so that they can make a good decision. Should we respond to this ask by providing the funds or not? And the more they know about the impact that the library has, I think the more favorable they would be.
Yeah, and what could happen is if I'm speaking for Kaimuki, which is where I am, that representative from Kaimuki might reach out to somebody from Molokai that they're having lunch with and go, hey, do you have the same kind of situation? And so it could become a more systemic conversation. So you don't want to, I mean, that's a great opportunity to try and take advantage of if possible.
I think we could keep this conversation going, and I see more people asking questions. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Padlet where folks can also contribute more anonymously. It's just asking activities that you participate in already, a step you might take to advocate, and factors that prevent you from advocating. So if you'd like to add your comments anonymously, please do that in that Padlet. And then folks that want to keep the conversation going live, I see more people on camera, so I'm going to mute and just.
Yeah, I just wanted to go off of what Sunny was saying. And I think a big part is remembering you might be at an individual library, but we all are working towards the same goal. And something Selena put in was like, don't waste a connection with $200 when you could get 2 million. So just remembering that we're all in this together, and that's part of aligning what our goals are to what's the big picture of what we're going for. So I think there's differences between inviting an official to say, hey, we're having a family reading night. Our libraries are supporting literacy. Look at this great thing we're doing. Don't you want to support libraries? Like, this is really important to your community. That's one way of advocating. But then the second half that I think is more private citizen is connecting with them privately to say, I work in a library. This is my own personal opinion. you should support this bill or this legislation because of what I'm seeing. And those are two different things. So highlighting all the great stuff you're doing is one thing. Asking for individual funding, I can only speak for the public library system because we're a state system, really should go through your administration because they know what the big system priorities are. And they also know they may have asked for something else that you don't know about yet. Yeah. So I don't know. That's just my thought. But I would love more information on how to walk that line because that is something that I've wanted to be more involved in advocacy, but I'm trying to figure out when. Like when can I attend these meetings and how do I address myself? And I'm not fully confident in that. So that's something that I would really be interested in learning more about.
Yeah, you make a good point, to check with your administration. I think when I was talking about contacting your legislators as an employee, representing your employer, that's if your job description covers doing that sort of thing. So if somebody above you is expected to be doing that sort of thing, then I wouldn't definitely take on their job duties without talking to them. I mean, if you report to them and they might delegate to you, then that's one thing. I think it's great you're interested in learning more about this, and maybe you should come as one or two of our meetings as a guest. We'd love to have you come on board. Yeah, Meera or Ty, do you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, this is Crystal. Actually, could I jump in for a second? Danielle has a really great point that there's many different ways to advocate, many levels to get involved in. And, a lot of times when we say advocacy, we're thinking of that legislative interaction, bills and testimony. There's also the grassroots route. And I'm also reading in a lot of the comments that maybe a little bit more education can be put out over the next year. Maybe we can think of ways to share how you can get involved in a grassroots daily way where you're not, an official representative of your library, but that community citizen. And I think another question that kept coming up is, how do I identify myself when I attend these meetings? I know one of the most important things is, of course, attending it on your own time. Like Ty had mentioned, using your own email address. And there's different ways to interact in that daily way that will help build that relationship. So when that legislator does get that official ask from your administration, they have all of these wonderful stories, like Kim Coco mentioned, the stories that feed their decision-making process, the feelings that they have towards libraries that will hopefully help them make a decision in your favor. Oh, I see Jessica's question, grassroots. So you can think about grass and how it grows from the ground, it's bottom up. So when we talk about legislative efforts, it's communicating to the higher level decision makers and working on bills, collecting testimony, things like that. Grassroots, it's all of the individual blades of grass that is all of the libraries in our community. And it's all of our individual actions that make a beautiful lawn. So you can think of a simple grassroots advocacy. So if I'm, uncomfortable submitting testimony, or maybe I don't want to host them, maybe it's even something as simple as speaking about a library collection to a friend, or saying, hey, we've got really great DVD. If you know a friend who likes DVDs, hey, we got some good DVDs. It's just promoting your library. And I think another thing that's really important is thinking about what the word advocacy means for you. Is it that legislative process, or is it just, hey, standing up and saying, we have these great resources, we want to make more connections with people? And I'll be quiet now so we can get a couple more people to talk.
We do have 5 more minutes in this session, so yes, if we could have a few more questions.
If you feel intimidated by maybe, say, starting at the legislative level, maybe check out your neighborhood board. Usually the people on the board are the ones who, they're running, so I don't want to say they're the movers and shakers, but they are kind of the ones that out of your neighborhood who are like, I see a problem, want to do something about it. So, attend the board meetings, kind of get the feel for your neighborhood. And then, maybe you can, one of the one of the things you can bring up is my local library is not looking too great, or we need something, what's your attitude toward that? And, start from the bottom and maybe generate some noise and some interest and, work your way up. And maybe eventually, it'll catch the ear of your representative or your senator. And that's one way of doing it. And you should try to do it with a smile because I work in an academic library and it's never the pleasant interactions that people remember. It's always that one sour note that people remember. So yeah, patience, persistence, be pleasant. So.
Okay, Jessica. Yeah.
I was just going to mention, I think too, like our current times and our current events kind of put a twist on this that, it's hard to just go up to a legislator and talk about banned books and all of the contentious issues that are surrounding that. And, even if we just came together and had a few talking points that we were all like, yeah, that sounds good. I like that you're like starting with that. Because it can be so polarizing and we have different legislators that feel different ways about that issue, so yeah, so maybe we can come together to have a good elevator pitch for just that issue. Just throwing
I
it
love
out.
that idea. Yeah, just kind of building it together and knowing the different talking points. So, it's not just you, right? You're speaking with the support of other professionals.
Yeah, and I have very personal feelings on that issue, and it's like, that's where speaking as a private citizen versus a state worker, and you guys have given great tips, so thank you.
I see Sunny, I have one thing or two things I want to mention. One is following up on Ty, who said, go to your local neighborhood board. That's actually, I forgot to mention, that was a big tip I got from the branch manager at Pearl City Public Library, Vicky. She started out by going to these neighborhood board meetings, and then actually other people started connecting with her. So it was a good community building effort for her to begin with. And that's a great way to kind of practice and work your comfort level up as you start navigating the political system more. And then also shout out to Danielle for sharing tips with me as well. So, and thanks to folks who added comments to the Padlet. I'm going to just put the link in again instead of reading those all out, but feel free to contribute. And then, Sunny, if you want to ask your question, if we have like 1-2 minutes.
Oh, I do know legislators have told me that Stacy Aldrich and her assistant, I forget her name, they do make the rounds with the legislators, and so they are advocating at that level, but it's also good to advocate at all levels. But I just wanted folks to know that. Thanks, Jessica.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you found it helpful. And I think Jade has put a link in the chat to the evaluation form.